So good morning and welcome to chapter 10, writing the history of the First World War, although actually in this chapter we're moving on to the other theme of this set of classes, which is commemoration. And so the question immediately comes up, what is the difference between history and commemoration? And sometimes you get links, for example, one of the main centers of research and one of the biggest museums in France for the First World War is called l'Historial de la Première Guerre. So we've got this deliberate attempt to put together history and mémorial, mémorial being then a kind of commemoration. And do we do history for the same reason that we do commemoration? And what is the difference? Well, I hope to explore some of the answers, and I hope you go away thinking that it's more complicated than you thought, which is the general aim of university education. And now commemoration is still very present 100 years later. And just last year in 2019, Peter Jackson, who is not a marginal film director because he directed The Lord of the Rings and some other such things, and he produced last year then this film, They Shall Not Grow Old, which is made up, if I remember correctly, of colorized film from the First World War. So it's real film from the First World War and put into color by technological means. The title comes from a poem often recited at the commemorative services. They shall not grow old. We're talking about the men who have died in the war. They shall not grow old as we that are left grow old. Age shall not worry them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning we will remember them. So one way, sort of an emotional comforting. In our minds, they will always be young. They will not grow old and weary as we will, we who are left. Now, people will have different opinions about this kind of exercise. So if we go off to our dictionary and into a Cambridge dictionary, this time when we look for commemoration, we get something that is done to remember officially and give respect to a great person or event. So there's a number of things there. So first of all, to remember, and very often it's lest we forget, pour que nous n'oublions pas, lest we forget, which is the reason given for commemoration. So it's to remember, but it's to remember officially. It's not just something individual. We have individual commemorations. A birthday party is a commemoration in a way, but it's about something official. And official, the problem, of course, with things which are official is that it suggests that some sort of consensus about the importance of an event and the meaning of the event. And as you know, in history and in politics, consensus can be something which is very difficult to get hold of. So remember officially and give respect to. Which leads to the political debates today of these last few years. Those people who do not commemorate the First World War, are they being disrespectful by not commemorating? Yeah, if you join the minute of silence, that's because you want to officially remember. But what if you don't? What does that mean? Does that mean you're being disrespectful? Well, we will see this question come up in connection with the First World War, although, as you know, it comes up with respect to other events too. I have a second dictionary at the bottom, the action or fact of commemorating a dead person or past event. Local martyrs received public commemoration, and so on and so forth. This reminded me of one of the TV channels I have on my cable, Toute l'Histoire, and their slogan. The slogan of the television channel is "Pour ne rien oublier," which I think is an absolutely fascinating idea. Of course, completely impossible to forget nothing, and so really it suggests there is a consensus on what is really important and what must not be forgotten, which I've already mentioned, because those who died in the First World War are certainly remembered, but those who died in 1913, in 1912, in 1911 from poverty or violence in the streets or whatever in Britain, they are not remembered. So it is a political choice to remember the dead when they die for an imperial project. Now, before 2014, 2014, then of course the beginning of the centenary, and 2018, the end of the centenary in theory, although as we shall see, there are still monuments being built. Before 2014, quite often it has to be said that the remembrance parades in different towns around the country could be relatively small and relatively dominated by very old people. These are not people who have lived through the First World War, because there are none of those left, but these are people who have lived, no doubt, through the Second World War and feel that there's that something needs to be remembered. However, once, first in the first section, I just want to look at a few of the sorts of commemorations which happened before 2014, fairly regular, every year, every day sort of event. So, for example, we have here the war monument in a small town near where my family come from, the Burnley War Monument, and this is a Portland stone cenotaph with carved figures of a soldier, an airman, and a sailor. And on each side, there are bronze female figures representing wives or mothers. And there are also some interesting symbols used in the design, such as the rosemary bush for remembrance and the cricket bat, representing the men's boyhood. And in front of the memorial, there is a pool of water surrounded by paving and grass. We often have water in the memorials, and there's a huge one in Washington, but it's obviously not British civilization, a huge reflective pool. So this is an interesting example of commemoration from the past. This is where they have the ceremony every year for Remembrance Sunday, but it was actually unveiled in 1926 and paid for by the mayor of Burnley. And it was estimated that over 30,000 people, this is a small town, that's practically the whole town, attended the ceremony. And this was actually sculpted by the same gentleman who sculpted the gates to Buckingham Palace. Gilbert said, this is the sculptor said, he had endeavored to conceive a memorial that shall breathe nothing of slaughter, but only of duty fulfilled, and by fulfillment of duty, the comfort and thankfulness brought to those who remain. Well, you could do a whole commentaire of the text on that, and the sort of words which are put forward, yes, that we don't want to remember the killing, we want to remember the duty fulfilled. So again, here we are in a situation of consensual duty, that nobody is supposed to have any doubt about this. Now, the local monuments are tremendously interesting because they were often decided, as I said, locally, and the money was found locally either from in this case, the mayor, sometimes from the whole population. Everybody gave a bit of money, and the decisions were made by local dignitaries, and notably were not made by the relatives of the dead or wounded. Just one more example. This is Brighton, 1922. This was put together, and this is a semi-enclosed temple with a pond, and it has some words on the monument. It says, "We cheered you forth, noble and kind and brave. Under your country's triumphing flag you fell. It floats true hearts over each quiet grave, brave and noble and kind. Hail and farewell." And I don't know the origin of this, but notice here they're underlying, under your country's triumphing flag. We won. Is it a remembrance monument or a victory monument or a little bit of both? There we go. The other major event for a long time is the poppy, and I'm going to talk quite a lot about the poppy because the poppy is something a rather strange and surprising symbol. So, of course, the origin is the poppy is said to be the flower which easily grew in no man's land between the trenches, despite all the mud and dead people lying around, that it was one of the first, once the existing vegetation had been destroyed by very large numbers of bombs, the poppy was the first sign of life to come back. That's the idea. And a very well-known poet wrote a poem about the poppy, and it became this symbol, and it indeed set up shortly after the First World War, was the Hague Fund, and they sold every year poppies to raise money for the wounded of the First World War, and for the families of the dead. And so it was a charity organization, which in a time when people considered that this was it was understandable and right that charities should deal with the needs of these people, and people expected relatively little from the government. It was established by the Hague Fund, Earl Hague, so one of the generals who led the British Army during the First World War. And there was a little bit of controversy at the time, because there was a section of the left wing of the population that said, well, General Hague is the person who organized the slaughter of hundreds of thousands of our young people, and it is well known, did not care about them. It's controversial. Yeah, you might think he did care about them, but that certainly was. Hague's name used to be in the middle, but they took his name away recently. Now, so that's a long tradition of the poppy, and I will come back to that. So it started in 2020, and even today, every year in November, and sometimes already in October, there are poppies everywhere, and every newsreader will be reading one, or there'll be trouble, and so on and so forth. However, this official commemoration, fairly strong. I mean, the poppies were quite popular in the 70s, and then a little less popular in the 80s. But you know, it was a tradition of commemoration which had a long history. But two things changed before the centenary. The first thing that changed is that the centenary of 1914 to 18 gave rise to the biggest commemorative festival in the history of Britain. Hundreds or thousands of events. Every town had its events, hundreds of hours of television programs, and so on and so forth, hundreds of books. So it really was absolutely exceptional, and by far the largest festival of commemoration ever. So much bigger than in 1964, after the 50 years of the war, for example, or the 50 years of the Second World War, and so on. So the first thing that changed is this was going to be a much bigger festival of commemoration. And the second thing that changed is that Britain, the United Kingdom, got involved in the 1990s and 2000s in a series of wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, which were highly controversial and sometimes unpopular. And in particular, then in 2003, one of the biggest demonstrations ever to exist in the United Kingdom was called against the war in Iraq. And this is at the time when Tony Blair was Prime Minister and determined to, who followed a policy in which he believed that the best future for the United Kingdom was in being a very, very close ally to the United States. And therefore, the war in Iraq should be enthusiastically supported. It was the war was, it's fair to say, pretty unpopular in Britain, and over 1 million people came to this demonstration. Now, it's difficult to impress the French with stories about demonstrations, because to have 1 million people on a demonstration in Paris, it doesn't happen every year, but it's not so rare. Whereas in London, it happens like every 50 years. Yeah, so this really was the most incredibly impressive thing. So let us say that very large numbers of people were very keen to show that they did not believe that the British Army was automatically right, that British military policy was automatically right. And so this huge festival of commemoration for the First World War, and a rise of skepticism, at least, or even opposition to British military projects in the world, came to shake up the consensus and cause a more interesting set of conflicts. There's another photograph of the same demonstration. As you can see, this is before the epidemic, and nobody needs to wear a mask. Now, as 2014 arrived, a powerful official consensus was proposed concerning the way of marking the centenary, centered around remembering the heroes who died. And we will have a look at this word hero in the past, a very, very important word, because, of course, if you say somebody is a hero, you don't just mean that they willingly went into a dangerous situation, were brave and died. You also mean that they were right. Because if you willingly go into a dangerous situation and take risks and are brave and you die, but the cause you are fighting for is generally considered to be criminal, terrorist, or horrific, then you're not a hero. So, the use of the word heroes actually implies that the British government, the British military policy was correct in the First World War, although this is often not necessarily spoken as such. Here is another side of this opposition in Britain, which I mentioned, that the internet, of course, has made in some ways political activism more easy, and there was the set up the Stop the War Coalition. And the Stop the War Coalition was set up against the war in Iraq. And it was one of the organizers of this huge demonstration. And they have a website and a series of articles about it to the war on terror and Islamophobia and so on and so forth. And so a political movement to discuss and campaign against the war in Iraq and different aspects of British foreign policy abroad, also in Afghanistan and so on. Now, once 2014 began, January 2014, there were a lot of appeals, let's not politicize the centenary. This is a very interesting call. It seems to be impossible not to politicize the centenary. And in any case, already in January, the Conservative Education Secretary, though the government was Conservative at this time, the Conservative Education Secretary wrote this article for the Daily Mail, and the title is there: "Why does the left insist on belittling true British heroes?" So very directly political wading in there, saying, you know, what do the left do? They mock our real heroes. And so let's look at the centenary and what is the danger, in the opinion of Michael Gove, of the centenary. The danger is that people on the left will be refusing to recognize our real British heroes, our true British heroes. And so this is posed then as a fact. They are heroes, that's a fact. There is a consensus and nobody should move against it. And this is what he said, Michael Gove, in this particular article: "The First World War may have been a uniquely horrific war, but it was also plainly a just war." And he explains why he thinks that the war was good, was right. "The ruthless social Darwinism of the German elites, the pitiless approach they took to occupation, their aggressively expansionist war aims, and their scorn for the international order all made resistance more than justified." Okay, so it's very clear defense then of the British Empire, whereas people who disagreed with him would say that aggressive expansionism, scorn for the international order, and a pitiless approach to occupation might be describing Britain in Africa, for example. So he starts in very, very quickly, and it's very interesting that the Daily Mail should illustrate this with a piece from Blackadder. Blackadder was a comedy series where Rowan Atkinson plays a character who lives at different moments in history, and the whole series on the First World War, and it is the ideas behind the series on the First World War are very much the generals are stupid, the workers are just being massacred for nothing. And this series was extremely popular. Many millions of people watched it. And so it's become part of the debate about the meaning of the First World War. Now, of course, if the government, from January, government ministers were launching into this and saying, yeah, we're going to fight on this, then naturally others had to respond. First of all, within establishment parties, the Labour Party responded, and Dan Jarvis, a Labour MP, was chosen as Labour's lead on the First World War centenary. So a very modern idea of public relations. We don't want all members of Parliament to give their own opinion. all Labour members of Parliament to give their own opinion on this one. No, we want somebody to organise what the Labour Party is going to say about the First World War centenary. It's a delicate issue. We might lose people if we're not careful. So let's name somebody as the lead. And you will not be surprised to know that Dan Jarvis is an ex-soldier. Because, of course, if you're going to criticise the government as a member of Parliament, if you're going to criticise the government about their commemoration of the First World War, well, in the case of the Labour Party, they wanted to make sure that nobody could say, you're disrespecting our soldiers, you're not brave, you've never been in the army. And so they chose somebody who was an ex-soldier to be the lead on the First World centenary. And he took a very interesting position. He insisted that Labour should not take a position on whether the war had been justified or not. So Michael Gove is saying it was a just war, it was justified, the British Empire was right. And Dan Jarvis is saying, we don't need to take a position on this. This is because among the people who Dan Jarvis hopes will vote Labour, some of them think that the First World War was a horrific crime by the elite against the people, and others have a more a position where they defend the British Empire on balance. And so he's trying to avoid a difficult question. So what did he say about the centenary? He said we should concentrate on ensuring that the centenary is sufficiently inclusive and that it celebrates the contribution of home front workers, men and women, and others who did not fight. Dan Jarvis insisted, that we need also to commemorate the miners, factory and railway workers who kept our country going, those who worked the land, often women, and cared for the wounded, almost always women. So that was the idea. So what other oppositions to the government were there? Well, activists in more radical organizations such as the Green Party or the Socialist Workers' Party tended to gather around the Stop the War coalition and its special initiative, No Glory in War. The Stop the War coalition for the centenary decided to launch a special campaign called No Glory in War. Fascinating idea. They clearly thought that it was not going to get many people together if you say, we are against the commemoration. Don't commemorate the First World War. The First World War was a horrible crime. Don't organize any commemoration. That was a position which was so much of a minority that it was very difficult to organize around. And so what they did is they left neutral. They remained neutral on the idea of commemoration, but they simply said no glory in war. We don't want commemoration which glorifies war. Meanwhile, in Scotland, some Scottish nationalists debated the relative importance of commemorating the First World War and celebrating the great victory of the Scottish at the Battle of Bannockburn in 1314. Yeah, so they said, we're Scottish. Should we be celebrating the victory of the British Empire, or should we rather be celebrating that great battle, a long time ago, 600 years ago? And this was a real debate in Scotland because this is also the time of the Scottish independence referendum in September 2014. Now, within the flood of commemorative ideas and activities, occasionally other countries were criticized for not doing enough. In Germany, perhaps understandably, there was far less commemoration of the First World War. The huge number of commemorative activities in Britain also got criticized sometimes from the point of view of people who wondered whether the tone and intentions were always appropriate. So, for example, the BBC News website in November 2014 published an article entitled, "Does the World War I tourist trade exploit the memory of the fallen?" So this is the BBC News website. So this is a major news outlet, and this is what the journalist said. In France and in Belgium, full of British people going to see the battlefields, on streets teeming with old soldiers and school groups, you can buy T-shirts proclaiming, "I'm a battlefield relic." You can buy teddy bears in tin hats, And perhaps most cynically, you can buy Passchendaele lager. Now, Passchendaele was one of the most bloody, horrific battles of the First World War, where hundreds of people died drowned in mud, and the rest, you know, won't go into too much detail. On the label of the Passchendaele lager bottle, it says, "When opening the bottle, please hold a minute of silence to commemorate those who fell on the battlefield." So the BBC News journalist is suggesting that this is cynical and tasteless. You can imagine there, you know, I really remember the importance of the First World War and those poor young soldiers who died. That's why I drank 10 bottles of beer. I commemorated it more than you did because you only drank 5 bottles of beer. Yes, it does have an amusing side to it. In The Guardian, we saw similar criticisms. Britain's commemoration of the Great War has lost all sense of proportion. It has become a media theme park, an indigestible cross between Downton Abbey and a horror movie. I cannot walk down the street or turn on the television without being bombarded by Great War diaries, poems, scrapbooks, and song. The BBC has gone war mad. We have Great War proms, Great War plays, Great War bake-ins, Great War gardens. There is the Great War of the Commonwealth, the Great War and Feminism, the Great War fashion show. It's just all too much. So what I want to do is I want to look at what are the main discourses, commemorative discourses about the First World War. For this, you need help from other historians. And one of my favorite French historians, Nicolas Offenstadt, divided into 3. The priorities of people commemorating the First World War and the priorities of events which commemorate the First World War. He said there are priorities of family history, there are priorities of local pride, and there are activist approaches. And so in these classes, after examining a few national events, I'm going to be looking in turn at each of these aspects: family history, local pride, activist approaches. So first of all, let's have a look at some national campaigns. And the most visible of the nationwide commemoration activities is the one I already mentioned, the poppy campaign, which involves wearing a red paper flower, the poppy of remembrance, in the weeks before November the 11th, a symbol which is obtained when you buy it. You make money for the Royal British Legion, which is a charity providing for the needs of soldiers and ex-soldiers today. Until 1994, the center of the poppy was inscribed Hague Fund, after the controversial First World War general who launched the charity. Since then, it has simply kept the words Poppy Appeal. Now, this is a contradictory event. The Poppy Appeal has always claimed to be non-political. Nevertheless, of course, although it was set up for the First World War, today, if you buy a poppy and give some money, as it says here on this campaign, the huge billboard from 2013, every poppy helps us to support British Armed Forces, past and present. So, in fact, you're not giving money for the wounded or families of the First World War. They're all finished now, they're all dead. You're giving money to raise money for the wounded of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Now, this is presented as a national duty. I shall show this in a moment. But naturally, of course, people could say, well, why don't we raise money for the Iraqi wounded? There were 10 times or 100 times more, or the Afghani wounded, and not for the people who were, in the opinion of some, unjustified in attacking them. Now, as you can see, the poppy campaign uses an emotional method. So here you have a rather sad-looking soldier with an artificial leg. So this is to encourage you to give money to the Poppy Appeal. And this one from 2010, you can see, again, is very emotional. And what's happening here is that you can see there is a tiny child putting, a beautiful child, putting flowers at the grave of her father, we imagine, who has no doubt died in Iraq or Afghanistan. And this poster criticized those people who are not wearing a poppy, says, oh, you're too lazy even to put on a poppy. That doesn't cause you much pain. Look at all the terrible pain that this little girl has to have. So sort of an emotionally manipulative campaign, if you like. And again, just like during the First World War, the war was presented as natural duty, and if you're not participating, it can only be that you are immoral or lazy. It's the same thing you have today, that the putting on a poppy is a national duty, a moral duty, and not a political position, in the opinion of this. Now, some in the newspapers, the poppy appeal caused more debate than it used to because of the existence of an anti-war campaign. The commemoration has caused much more debate than it used to. And Lindsay German, one of the leaders of the Stop the War campaign, wrote in a column in The Independent, given that wars tend to be unpopular, the government and the military try to recast appeals for war as support for individual troops. This is what lies behind the hugely increased profile of the poppy appeal in recent years. And you can see the point of this. It must be very difficult to go around saying, give money to help us to help us run the war in Iraq, support the Iraq war, give us money, or the Afghanistan war. And so this is always framed as you're helping individual poor soldiers. Now, the campaign in 2014 was similar to, if more grand than those in previous years, and it could involve considerable moral pressure. People who were invited to appear on television in October or November were given by the BBC in particular, and also by other television companies, when you arrived in the studio, they gave you a poppy. If you weren't wearing one, they gave you one. And sometimes people who were invited to speak in a television program, if they refused to wear a poppy, they were not allowed to appear on television. And we see in this article in Metro, which is a free newspaper which distributes more than 1 million copies a day, you have this question: what do you think? Should TV presenters be made to wear poppies? Should it be obligatory? So this is very interesting article to see in a democratic country. You know, what do you think? Should we oblige them? Now, it might be considered to be rather surprising, because when you wear a poppy, we imagine that you're saying that you've personally decided to express the importance for you of remembering soldiers from 100 years ago and supporting soldiers more recently. But of course, if it's obligatory, then it means nothing at all. If anything which is obligatory cannot have a meaning of giving respect and so on. And here, what had happened is that one veteran journalist, very experienced journalist, for, I can't remember what channel he was for. This is Jon Snow. He didn't wear a poppy when he was on television, and there was a scandal. There's a scandal about it, and that's what led to this article. But what's interesting about this is that Jon Snow could go on television without a poppy. He's at the end of his career. He's an extremely well-known journalist. He wasn't risking anything. Certainly, you can imagine that any younger TV presenter who was hoping to make a career would not do this. So that's my first half-hour video on this question, and in the next chapter, chapter 11, then I will be going on to I will be saying more about the poppy campaign, and then going on to other aspects of commemoration and how it works. Thank you for listening.